Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Metropolitan Virtual Playhouse. Happy mid-October. Delighted to be with you yet again. We're up near 30 weeks now, and it is still a pleasure, a challenge, and a real joy to know that we're connecting with you through the ether. Remember, be well, stay safe, love one another. Tonight we have a play about bluster and judgment and, well, cultural wars of a certain time, a stage adaptation of Edith Wharton's short story, Xingu, adapted by our own Kimberly Wadsworth. In 2012, Metropolitan Playhouse produced The House of Mirth, another adaptation of Edith Wharton, in this case arranged by Charles Frommer for her to put together with Clyde Fitch. It featured Amanda Jones as Lily Bart, and among many favorite actors, the late Rick Davies and Kelly King. Rest their souls. In a sense, we do this to honor them. It earned multiple nominations for New York Innovative Theater Awards. It earned Outstanding Costume Design for Sidney Fortner, but it was not our first Edith Wharton adaptation. No, in 2001, as part of a summer program of shorts called Midsummer Getaway, we were delighted to welcome stage manager, dramaturg, a longtime friend of the theater, Kimberly Wadsworth's adaptation of Xingu, and this seemed the perfect opportunity to bring it back. My earnest hopes is that Kim herself will be able to join us after the reading for a chat that has something to do with whether we get our internet connections working the way we hope they will. And before that, we will be delighted to welcome Uta DeFarlo and Lori Foote, respectively, fundraiser and docent at Edith Wharton's home in Lenox, Massachusetts, The Mount. They will talk a bit about the story and its context, as well as the continuing and inspired work of the staff of The Mount and the entire institution, not only to offer programs and support during our year of pandemic, but also throughout the years. Not merely an historic home, The Mount is a cultural center celebrating her intellectual, artistic, and humanitarian legacy, and there is quite a lot to celebrate there. But now, I know you'll be happy to hear me say, without further ado, it is time for Kimberly Wadsworth's adaptation of Edith Wharton's Xingu.
Greetings and welcome to the Hillbridge Cultural Club. It's 1911, a Saturday afternoon in the spring. The club meets in the house of Edith Ballinger. Her parlor is beautifully decorated, a bit cramped. On the table, there is a prominent stack of books. The topmost one is titled The Wings of Death. It's by Osric Dane. The club's members, these indomitable huntresses of erudition, are Mrs. Edith Ballinger, my mistress and president of the Cultural Club; Miss Laura Glyde, an artistic soul; Mrs. Justinia Plinth, very stern, very respectable; Mrs. Geraldine Leverett, rather insecure and quite a bit afraid of saying the wrong thing; Miss Gertrude Van Vlyck, a practical woman, fancies herself a bit of a scientist; Mrs. Fanny Roby, very down to earth; Mrs. Osric Dane, author, very imposing. Oh, and I am Lucy, the parlor maid. Miss Van Vlyck is here, ma'am.
Very good. Would you show her in, Lucy? And then would you bring the tea?
That only leaves Mrs. Roby.
Now, Justinia, it is only a few minutes past noon. It would be unfair to fault her yet.
I certainly made a point of being punctual, as did the others. Besides, you made it perfectly clear we were to meet an hour earlier.
And Mrs. Roby does make a habit of late arrivals.
So long as she is on time for Osric Dane's arrival, that is the important thing.
What has Fanny Roby done this time?
Nothing. She just hasn't arrived yet, is all, and I'm sure she's only slightly detained.
I must say, Edith, you are patient with that woman to a fault. I would have asked for her resignation from the club long ago.
I really don't see that there's any need to suggest such a drastic step.
Well, she's hardly lived up to Professor Forlin's recommendation.
He said she was the most agreeable woman he had ever met, and she has been quite lovely, you must admit. Oh, not perfect, to be sure, but still.
Oh, rubbish. Agreeable is such a broad term. He could have meant anything by it. And how can we be sure of any woman from a man's estimation anyway? I assumed he was giving his professional opinion and that she shared his background in biology. Do you know what she said to me the first day she came to the club? I was speaking with her apart from the rest of you, and I happened to mention the pterodactyl and asked for her opinions on it. Do you know what she said to me?
No.
She said, I really know so little about meters. Meters? Why, she has no knowledge of biology at all. Really, I don't know what Professor Forlin sees in her. I suppose she flattered him. Or else it's the way she does her hair.
Here, ma'am. I'll start serving the tea.
Lucy, remember what I said about when we give a tea, that it is my duty to serve the guests? A tea is different from other meals. I serve the guests, not you. I apologize. Lucy's a lovely girl, but she's new to us.
You are just too patient, Mrs. Bollinger, with your house help and with Fanny Roby. It's not doing them any favors to excuse their mistakes and let them stay, you know.
Now there will be no more talk of Mrs. Roby resigning the club this afternoon. Her faults have all been small ones to this point. Never mind that she doesn't know biology. She certainly is willing to learn a bit, I'm sure. Our club can only help its members learn as well as teach, can it not?
Mrs. Roby is here, ma'am.
Oh, good. Show her in, please. You see, we still have plenty of time amongst ourselves first.
I'm so sorry I'm late. Mr. Roby had to deliver me this afternoon and there was trouble with his automobile. Mrs. Dane hasn't arrived yet, has she?
No, not yet. I'd actually asked that we all meet before she arrived, so we all had a chance to discuss her book, The Wings of Death, amongst ourselves first. We also ought to decide what we will discuss when Osric Dane first arrives.
I thought we were to talk of her novel.
We can hardly make that our chief subject, but at least not too intentionally. Of course, we can let our talk drift in that direction, but we ought to have some other topic as an introduction.
I'm sorry. I haven't actually yet read the book.
You haven't read it?
Although I have heard of Osric Dane and have heard a great many good things about her.
Now, ladies, it's not as if missing the book is a grave sin. After all, I'm sure that Mrs. Roby has read her first book, The Supreme Instant, an equally remarkable book. You have read that one, yes?
Actually, I didn't mean to, indeed. I saw it at my brother's house when I was staying with him in Brazil. And in fact, I carried it with me when we all went on a boating party one afternoon. However, some of my brother's friends are quite the characters, and somehow we all got to shying things at each other on the boat.
Shying things?
Throwing things at each other. It's an expression of my brother's. In any case, in the midst of it, someone grabbed The Supreme Instant and it went overboard. So I never did get to read it after all.
I can understand with all your other pursuits, you should not find much time for reading. But I should have thought you might at least have picked up The Wings of Death before Osric Dane's arrival today.
I did get a copy. I had meant to at least glance through it, but I've actually been so absorbed in the novel of Trollope that...
No one reads Trollope now.
I'm only just beginning.
And does he interest you?
He amuses me.
Amusement is hardly what I look for in my choice of books.
Oh, certainly, The Wings of Death isn't amusing.
Was it meant to be? Assuredly not.
Oh, assuredly not. That is what I was going to say. It was meant to elevate.
I hardly see how a book steeped in the bitterest pessimism can be said to elevate, however much it may instruct.
Oh, I meant to instruct, of course.
Do they get married in the end?
Who?
The man and the girl in The Wings of Death. That's what it's about, isn't it? I'm assuming. Any novel is usually about that. I always think that one thing that matters, if they parted, it spoils my dinner.
I should hardly advise you to read The Wings of Death in that spirit.
You know, I feel that the beautiful part of it is that no one can tell how The Wings of Death ends. Osric Dane, overcome by the awful significance of her own meaning, has mercifully veiled it, perhaps even from herself, as Apelles, in representing the sacrifice of Iphigenia, veiled the face of Agamemnon.
Are you reciting poetry?
You should look it up when you return home. I always make it a point to look things up.
I was about to ask whether a book can instruct unless it elevates.
Oh, I don't know if it's fair to ask such a question of such a book. After all, The Wings of Death has attracted more attention among thoughtful people than any novel since Robert Elsmere.
And don't you think that it's just the dark hopelessness of it all, the wonderful tone scheme of black on black, that makes it such an artistic achievement? The book is etched, not painted, yet one feels the color values so intensely. It reminded me, when I read it, of Prince Rupert's Manière Noire.
Is Prince Rupert someone you met abroad?
I believe, ladies, that our discussion emphasizes that the wonderful part of the book is that it may be looked at from so many points of view. I hear that as a study of determinism, none other than Professor Lupton ranks it with the death of ethics.
I'm told that Osric Dane spent 10 years in preparatory studies before beginning to write it. 10 years! She looks up everything, verifies everything. It has always been my principle, as you know. Nothing would induce me now to put aside a book before I'd finished it. It's important to read and look up everything.
What do you think of The Wings of Death, then?
I've thought enough of it to read it instead of reading Trollope, at least.
Miss, there is a Mrs. Osric Dane here.
Oh, goodness. Show her in, Lucy. Show her in. Mrs. Dane, welcome. Welcome to Hillbridge. We are so happy you could join us. I'm Edith Bollinger, president of the club, and may I present our other members. This is Miss Gertrude Van Vlyck, our treasurer, and Miss Laura Glyde, and our vice president, Mrs. Justinia Plinth, Mrs. Gertrude Leverett, our secretary, and finally, Mrs. Fanny Roby, our newest member. Oh, well, then do sit down, won't you?
She has a way of looking at you that makes you feel like there's something wrong with your hat.
Goodness, what a brute she is.
Now, Mrs. Dane, how do you take your tea?
Oh, Mrs. Dane, we can't hear you. Do speak up. Speak up, Mrs. Dane.
I said I don't. I take coffee.
Coffee? Oh, I see. Well, I apologize for being unprepared, but I certainly like our guests to be catered to, so I'll just send Lucy to fetch a cup for you. Lucy, please bring some coffee for Mrs. Dane right away. I do apologize again, but our little club has been in the habit of taking tea instead of coffee.
I see. Myself, I left tea years ago for coffee.
Oh, I understand. Is this your first visit to Hillbridge?
Oh, no doubt it is. Hillbridge is so small. You would have had no reason to come before. But
I assure you, Mrs. Dane, we have a great many representative people.
Yes, what do they represent?
Oh, well, it's a community. I hope it is not too much to say that we stand for culture.
and art.
Yes, for art and literature.
And for sociology, I trust.
You see, Mrs. Dane, we have a standard.
Oh, yes, a standard.
The object of our little club, Mrs. Dane, is to concentrate the highest tendencies of Hillbridge, to centralize and focus its intellectual effort. We aspire to be in touch with whatever is highest in art and literature and ethics.
What ethics?
Your coffee, Mrs. Dane. Cream?
Thank you, Lucy. Cream, Mrs. Dane. Sugar.
You must excuse us, Mrs. Dane, for not being able just at present to talk of anything but your book, The Wings of Death.
Yes, we are so anxious to know the exact purpose you had in mind in writing your wonderful book.
You will find that we are not superficial readers.
We are eager to hear from you if the pessimistic tendency of the book is an expression of your own convictions or possibly
Or merely a somber background, brushed in to throw your figures into more vivid relief. Are you not primarily plastic?
I have always maintained, Mrs. Dane, that you represent the purely objective method.
Oh, yes. How do you define objective?
In reading you, we don't define. We feel.
The cerebellum is not infrequently the seat of literary emotions.
Ah, yes, the cerebellum. The club took a course in psychology last winter.
Which psychology?
Now, Gertrude, I believe it was last year that we took psychology. This winter, we have been absorbed in, we've just been
In Xingu.
Oh, yes, Xingu, of course.
Yes, Xingu. And we've been so hoping, Mrs. Dane, that today you will tell us just what you think of it.
Of Xingu.
Yes. Well, knowing how engrossing the subject is, you will understand how it happens that the club has let everything else go to the wall for the moment since we took up Xingu. I might almost say that were it not for your books, nothing else seems to us worth remembering.
I am glad to hear that you make one exception.
Oh, of course. But as you have shown us that so very naturally, you don't care to talk of your own things, we really can't let you off from telling us exactly what you think about Xingu, especially as some people could say one of your last books was saturated with it.
May I ask to which of my books you refer?
Well, that's just what I want you to tell us. Because though I was present, I didn't actually take part.
Present at what?
Why, at the club's discussion, of course. And so we're dreadfully anxious to know just how it was that you went into the Xingu.
Ah, you say the Xingu, then, don't you?
I know. It is a shade pedantic, isn't it? Personally, I prefer to drop the article, but I don't know how the other members feel about it. However, They probably think, as I do, that nothing really matters except the thing itself. Xingu.
Surely everyone must feel that about Xingu.
I have known cases where it has changed a whole life.
It has done me worlds of good.
Of course. Of course. The difficulty is that one must give so much time to it. It is very long.
I can't imagine grudging the time given to such a subject.
Quite right. But it still is long and deep in places. Also, it isn't easy to skip.
I never skip.
Oh my, no. It is dangerous too in Xingu. Even at the start, there are places where one can't. One must just wade through.
Oh, Mrs. Roby, I should hardly call it wading.
Really? You always found it went swimmingly?
Well, of course, there are some difficult passages.
Oh, yes. Some are not at all clear,
No.
even if one is familiar with the origin.
And I suppose you are?
Oh, it's really not difficult up to a certain point, though some of the branches are very little known and it's almost impossible to get at the source.
Have you ever tried?
No, but a friend of mine did, a very brilliant man, and he told me that it was best for women not to try.
And did you find he was right?
Now, we mustn't forget that as absorbing as Xingu is to us, it may be less interesting to our guests.
Oh, no, on the contrary, I assure
And
you.
we must not allow our little meeting to end without persuading Mrs. Dane to say a few words to us on a subject which today is much more present in all our thoughts. I refer, of course, to the wings of death.
I am so sorry, but before Mrs. Dane begins, I think I'd better run away. Luckily, as you know, I haven't read her books, so I should be at a terrible disadvantage among your discussions. Besides, I have an engagement to play bridge.
Wait, do wait. I'll go with you. I'm so sorry. I'd quite forgotten another engagement. A pleasure, but I must dash. Now, Mrs. Ruby, if you will let me walk a little way with you, I should so like to ask you a few more questions about Xingu.
Well, I, for one, can't say that I consider Mrs. Dane's departure a great loss.
I do believe that she came on purpose to be nasty.
I knew we ought to have a subject ready. This is what happens when one is unprepared. Now, if we'd only begun talking of Xingu from the first.
Why, it was the fact of our knowing so much more about it than she did, unprepared though we were, that made Osric Dane so furious. I should think that was plain enough to see.
I am glad we were able to show her that a broad and up-to-date culture is not confined to the great intellectual centers.
No.
What surprised me most, frankly, is that Fanny Roby should be so up on Xingu.
Well, really, Mrs. Roby has a knack for making a little go a long way. We do owe her a debt for happening to remember she'd heard of Xingu, though.
I fancy Osric Dane hardly expected to take a lesson in Xingu here in Hillbridge.
When she asked me what we represented, you remember? I wish I'd simply said, we represent Xingu.
I'm not sure it would have been wise to say so.
May I ask why?
Surely I understood from Mrs. Roby herself that the subject was one it was well not to go into too deeply.
I think that applied only to an investigation of the origins of the... It's actually part of the subject I never studied myself.
Nor I.
And yet it seems, doesn't it, The part that is fullest of an esoteric fascination.
I don't know on what you base that.
Well, didn't you notice how intensely interested Mrs. Dane became as soon as she heard what that brilliant foreigner, he was a foreigner, wasn't he? What he had told Mrs. Roby about the origin of the right, or whatever you call it.
It may not be desirable to touch upon on that part of the subject in general conversation. However, from the importance it evidently has to a woman of Osric Dane's distinction, I feel as if we ought not to be afraid to discuss it among ourselves, with closed doors if necessary.
Oh, I'm quite of your opinion, on condition that all grossness of language is avoided.
Oh, I'm sure we shall understand without resorting to that.
And yet, I also cannot see what benefit is to be derived from investigating such peculiar customs.
One benefit, at least, is that we shall not be placed again in the humiliating position of finding ourselves less up on our own subjects than Fanny Roby is.
So then, have you got a copy?
Copy? Of what?
Of the book?
Book? What book?
Xingu, of course.
Well, it's not a thing one cares to leave about.
I should think not.
So it is a book, then?
Oh, well, there is a book, naturally.
Then why did Miss Glyde call it a religion?
What? A religion? I never.
You did. You spoke of rites, and Mrs. Plinth said it was a custom.
Perhaps they used to do something of the kind at the Eleusinian Mysteries?
I understood there was to be no indelicacy.
Maybe Mrs. Plinth was right, and we ought not to explore this. After all, if it really is indecent.
No, really, it is too bad that we should not be able to talk the matter over quietly amongst ourselves. Personally, I think if one goes into Xingu at all, and I don't see how one can avoid doing so if one wishes to keep up with the thoughts of the day.
Wait! That's it!
What's it?
It's a thought. I mean, a philosophy.
No. Excuse me if I correct you all, but Xingu must be a language.
A language?
A language?
Certainly. Don't you remember Mrs. Roby saying there were several branches and that some were hard to trace? What else could that apply to but dialects?
It really is Mrs. Roby's fault for not being clearer.
Oh, never mind clearer. I dare say we shall find out she was mistaken on nearly every point.
That's it. Why not look it up? Put an end to this once and for all.
Lucy, would you please fetch for us volume W through Z from Mr. Ballinger's encyclopedia?
Oh, yes.
Oh, I may have something else that may be of help.
Well, what do you have?
I carry this everywhere with me. Appropriate allusions. No matter what the social occasion, it is guaranteed to have pertinent quotation, so one may never be at a loss. Now, let me see. Anniversaries, joyful and melancholy. Banquets, social and municipal. Baptisms, sectarian and Anglican. And
that's not the kind of thing we need, Mrs. Leverett.
Here you are, ma'am.
I'll take that volume, Lucy. This is more the thing. Let's see. It isn't here.
Probably not fit to be in a book of reference.
Did you just look under Z? Try under X. Have you found it?
Yes, I have.
Oh, what is it? Tell us.
Oh, but if there's anything offensive, I beg you not to read aloud.
It's a river.
A river?
A river in Brazil.
You must be mistaken. You must be reading the wrong thing.
It's the only Xingu there.
But that's ridiculous. We all remember studying Xingu last year, or the year before. Yes?
I thought I did when you said so.
I said so?
You said it had crowded everything out of your mind.
Well, you said it had changed your whole life.
And also, Miss Van Vlyck said she had never grudged the time she'd given it.
I made it clear that I knew nothing whatever of the original.
Oh, I believe Miss Van Vlyck is right. She was talking of the river the whole while and making fools of us.
That's preposterous. How could she?
Listen. The Xingu, one of the principal rivers of Brazil, rises on the plateau of Mato Grosso and flows in a northerly direction for a length of no less than 1,118 miles, entering the Amazon near the mouth of the latter river. The upper course of the Xingu is auriferous and fed by numerous branches. Its source was first discovered in 1884 by the German explorer Fundensteinen after a difficult and dangerous expedition through a region inhabited by tribes still in the Stone Age of culture.
She did speak of it having branches.
And of its great length.
And Mrs. Roby has been living in Brazil.
Yes, with her brother. He is consul there.
And she said it was awfully deep and that you couldn't skip. You just had to wade through.
But how can there be anything improper about a river?
Improper?
He said about the source, that it was corrupt.
No, not corrupt, but hard to get at. Someone who had been there had told her so. I dare say it was the explorer himself. Doesn't it say the expedition was dangerous?
Difficult and dangerous.
Oh, do you remember her telling us she hadn't read The Supreme Instant because she'd taken it on a boating party while she was staying with her brother and someone had shied it overboard? Well then, didn't she also tell Osric Dane that one of her books was saturated with Xingu? Of course it was. If one of Mrs. Roby's rowdy friends had thrown it into the river, everything she has said applies to the river.
Osric Dane was taken in too.
Oh, perhaps that's what Mrs. Roby did this for. When Mrs. Dane came in, I overheard her say she thought Osric Dane looked like a brute. She may have wanted to give her a lesson.
Well, it was hardly worthwhile to do it at our expense.
Well, at least she did succeed in interesting Mrs. Dane, which was more than we did.
Well, what chance had we? Mrs. Roby monopolized her from the first. That must have been her purpose, to give Osric Dane a false impression of her own standing in the club. She would hesitate at nothing to attract attention. We all know how much she's won over her patron, Professor Forland.
I hear she makes him give bridge teas every Thursday.
Why, today is Thursday, and that must be where she's gone. And taken Osric Dane with her.
And they're laughing over us at this very moment.
She would hardly dare confess the truth of her actions to Osric Dane.
Well, then why would Osric Dane have rushed out after her?
Well, we'd all been telling her how wonderful Xingu was, and she wanted to find out more about it.
And I'm sure she must have. And that's exactly what they're both laughing over now.
Well, I have no wish to criticize, but I must say that unless the club can protect its members against the recurrence of such unbecoming scenes,
My time is really too valuable, after all.
I always deprecate anything like a scandal.
Some women will stop at nothing.
No! If anything of the kind ever happened in my house, I should have felt that I owed to myself to either ask for Mrs. Roby's resignation or to offer my own. Fortunately for me, the matter was taken out of my hands by our president's decision that the right to entertain was a privilege of her office. I think the others will agree that as she was alone in this opinion, she ought to be alone in deciding the best way to efface these deplorable consequences.
As unpleasant as this has all been, I still feel that asking someone to resign altogether is a most extreme step.
Oh, she did make you say that you had got on swimmingly in Xingu.
Madam Secretary,
Yes?
please take a letter on my behalf. My dear Mrs. Roby, it is only after much careful thought that I have reached the following conclusion concerning your association with us.
It's a real pleasure to welcome all of you back and to invite my next two guests to join us. Uta DiCarlo and Lori Foote of The Mount. I will let introduce themselves and stand not on ceremony as soon as I manage to do one little thing with the videos. If all goes well, here we are. Almost well. I'm going to adjust this. I'm going to hide myself. But Uta, Lori of The Mount, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you. I'm Uta DiCarlo, and the Director of Development at The Mount, and you can see it a little bit behind me. This is the view from the gardens, and we're delighted to be here and obviously to represent Edith and her literary legacy, as well as her home legacy. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Lori, I think you need to unmute your audio, Lori. So sorry. There you, looks like you got it. Perfect. Thanks so much.
Okay, very sorry, folks. Well, I want to thank you so much for inviting us tonight. And I am still smiling from this presentation of one of Edith Wharton's funniest works. Now, this is a little unusual for Edith Wharton because this play is probably this short story is probably one of the few you could actually laugh during. And Edith Wharton is the mistress of satire. And here she is, she's presenting to you a bunch of ladies, probably middle or upper class ladies, who are in the pursuit of culture, but they, in her words, as though it was dangerous. They're doing it in a band because it would be too dangerous to do alone. Now, Edith Wharton wrote many, many things. This is only about one of over 100 short stories that Edith Wharton wrote. She was a genius of a woman. She was born in 1862 as Edith Jones. She was part of the upper class. She had a wonderful societal growing up period, and she spent a lot of time in Europe. But she was unusual for her time. And the reason she was unusual is she was an intellectual. And this was not quite the thing you would like to be in that period of time, especially around the turn of the century, around 1900, 1902. Now, Edith Wharton was a complicated woman as well. She had many, many male friends, mostly because the intellectuals of the day were mostly men. That is in the United States. Over in Europe, there were quite a few more women who were involved. But she presents this satire of women who are trying to appear intellectual, but are not necessarily winning at this game. She was not a woman who really entertained the idea of frivolous conversation with other women. She really wanted a very great depth to conversation. And this she found in most of those male intellectuals of the time. Edith Wharton, by the way, wrote over 40 books in 40 years. She wrote 23 novels, 10 works that were novellas, 2 translations. She had 4 travel novels, and she had 4 unpublished works. And she just seemed to be a fountain of information. One of the things that's particularly fascinating about Edith Wharton is the more you know about Edith Wharton, the more interesting her works become. So in this particular work, the person who is the author, who is Orsic Dane, is actually in reality her friend Henry James, the author. Now, I know he is a man and she is a woman. However, Edith Wharton and Henry James also had a complex relationship. He was quite a bit older than she was. However, he was a very good mentor for her, but he was a very deep, deep person. His works were very complex and hard to get through, and Edith Wharton found them kind of stark and his characters without feeling. Edith Wharton tended to focus on the real things in life. However, at one point, Edith Wharton, in this sense, uses the author, Orsic Dane, and she writes a novel called The Wings of Death. Now, Henry James, her friend, wrote a book called The Wings of the Dove. And this is just a parody of that. And Mr. James kind of tried to do a one-upmanship with Edith Wharton when he wrote another story called The Velvet Glove. And in it, his main character, Amy, is Edith Wharton. And the book that she writes, because she is an author, is called The Top of the Tree. And Edith Wharton had written a novel called I'm failing here. The Fruit of the Tree. So again, he's doing a reverse parody. They had this little tete-a-tete going on during this complex relationship. Now, I have fallen in love with Edith Wharton because I've been at the Mount since 2002. I went there to just have a little job for the summer, and I never left. And the reason was because the dynamics of this woman are incredible. She not only was an author of books, but she was a well-known interior designer and landscape artist. So she had her hand in the deck in the decoration and design of the house that you see behind Uda in that photograph. And she was just so prolific. She really didn't start her career till she was over 35. And she had married late for a young woman of her day. She was 23, but she married a 35-year-old Teddy Wharton. They built this beautiful house in Lenox in between 1901 and 1902. Now, the reason they went to Lenox, because they had been residents of Newport, Rhode Island, where most of the wealthy were, was because Lenox, Massachusetts was so attractive in the beautiful setting of the Berkshires. She felt that Newport was not a healthy place to be, that her health was particularly affected, that there were too many social demands. There were less in the Berkshires. Things were a lot less demanding for her. And the town of Lenox not only was beautiful, but it had in the past attracted a number of intellectuals into its environs. And it had a whole group of people living in Lenox who were of the lower classes of the time, but could fulfill all the things that were needed for those of the wealthy class building their homes in Lenox, which included being servants and craftsmen for the families moving in. Teddy Wharton's family also had a home in Lenox, which is how they came by the land. And so they had family ties. And there was also really good access by trains. So you could get from Boston to New York in less than 2 hours into Lennoxdale and Stockbridge, Massachusetts, and just a short trip to your home after that. I'm going to just allude to the photograph of the Mount for just a moment. This beautiful mansion, which is about 17,000 square feet, was considered a small cottage in Lenox. And it was basically designed by Edith Wharton. Now, she was the anti-Victorian designer. She did not like the dark Victorian crowded kind of scene. She liked the light, bright, airy kind of decoration design that she found in classical architecture in Europe. So she designs the house. The house is designed after both English country manners and Italian villas and French chateaus. It is exquisite. We have about 50,000 visitors who come to visit us every year, and with good reason. We have lots of tales to tell, those of us who are docents, because the amount of material that we have to work with is so extensive. Now, Edith Wharton wrote a lot of short stories. I tend to really like those short stories because they are a lot lighter than the books. She was not the fan of the happy ending. So many of her books were quite dark, but all of her short stories have this wonderful twist in them that you come to at the end, like a great big surprise, just waiting for you to open when you get there. So I'm going to turn this over to Uda now, who's going to talk a little bit more about the Mount. And
well, thank you very much. And I just want to very briefly go back to the Berkshires overall, which have not only attracted Edith Wharton, but before her there was also, in addition to her, there was Robert Patterson, and there were the Vanderbilts, and Daniel Chester French, the sculptor, also had a summer home there. And of course, Herman Melville had actually preceded her as a key writer who lived in the Berkshires. And one of the beautiful things about the estate is it's only 1 of 5% of historical buildings or historic properties that are dedicated to women. And as Lori has already mentioned, she designed both the house and the gardens. And the gardens actually she had the additional assistance of her niece, Beatrix Farrand, who was an extraordinarily well-known design architect, garden architect, including for later on in life Dumbarton Oaks in Washington, D.C., among others. So, you know, and the Mound over the last, after the Whartons sold the house, it was first owned by two private families and then actually became part of the Fox Hollow School, which was a girls' school. And then when they had to close down, a theater company came in several years later, Shakespearean Company, and started their work there. And then Edith Wharton Restoration was created because so much of the buildings, the main building that you're seeing behind me, but also the stables and the gatehouse and others had really been falling apart to a very significant degree. So in the past 30 years, you know, we have rebuilt to some degree the Mound and have renovated it and brought it up to date. And at the same time, the Mound is now pretty much the literary center of the Berkshires. We have normally authors from around the country and beyond who come and present and talk about their books, including book award winners, I'm sorry. And we also have a lot of other on-site events, including ghost tours. We have normally a Sculpture Now creation where artists bring their sculptures to the Mound for the duration of the season. Obviously, none of this happened this year. We had to transfer a lot of what we did to online. And we opened our grounds to the general public and are continuing to do this through the end of the year to walk and enjoy the grounds, which is over 50 hectares and acres, I'm sorry. Hectares is the German version, acres, and people have been truly enjoying it and find it's a respite, it's the place they want to be. And Edith Wharton was a dog lover, so we have always allowed people to bring their four-legged family members as well. And yeah, that's it for the moment. Thank you for the opportunity. And of course, we would like to invite each and every one of you to come and visit the Mound. We're at the height of, or near the height of the fall season, and we are preparing a light exhibit called Nightwood Winter Immersion, which has an immersive light installation along many of our paths, our gardens, and that will start up in mid-November. And we think it will really further provide respite and enjoyment in these very interesting times. I hear you.
Okay, so we hope this is better. And I have a great privilege to bring Kimberly Wadsworth into the meeting, as well as some of the actors. If any of them would like to turn on their videos and participate, that'll take place in just a moment. But in the meantime, here's a question I think that Uta and Laura, you might really be interested in addressing. And the question is, what should audience members know about etiquette and expectations for the general conversation in Wharton's area? The general conversation has survived in some respects into the 20th century. Anything you'd like to say about that? A little context for the play.
If I'm to understand you, you're talking about the manners and the way that we discuss things. Is that correct?
I can only read the question again. I can't interpret it.
I'm
What should
sorry.
audience members
Well,
know
I will
about
talk.
etiquette and expectations for, quote, general conversation, end quote, in Wharton's area?
Well, during Wharton's era, the expectation or for that particular class, there were many, many regulations for women as far as what they could and could not do at the time. And so there were manners that they had to follow. They had to be rather subservient to their husbands. The husbands worked and they entertained and took care of homes. They did try to do intellectual pursuits. There was a rising new wealth class, and this caused a lot of disruption for the upper class because they did not want to admit them. So the ladies of this particular book club in Xingu may have been part of that rising class, so that Edith Wharton felt that they did not have enough intellectual pursuit, or at least depth to their pursuit. But there were so many regulations: your dress, your manners, how you could discuss things, how many taboo subjects there were. And so it was a real dance to live in that era.
Well, thank you so much. Just a note to YouTube listeners, I understand my microphone is a bit low for you. We are trying to accommodate some feedback issues, as you've seen before. But right now, I'm going to admit both director Suzanne Torin and author Kimberly Wadsworth to join the discussion. Questions welcome on YouTube. I'll share them as best I can. Hello, Suzanne, and hello, Kim.
Hi, Alex. Thank you. Hi, Kim. And hi, Uta, and hi, Lori. Thank you.
And hi, Suzanne. Thank you.
Kim, I'd like to know what inspired this adaptation. If you can remember back when, was it a particular reading or a particular moment, or just the sheer delight of taking Edith Wharton's words in hand?
Could you
We'll need
unmute,
your
Kim?
audio on. Sorry.
Sorry about that. That was my fault this time. That was my fault. This short story literally fell into my lap. I had picked up just a paperback book in a thrift store, just as something cheap to read on the subway. And I was looking for something like that, and I came across a very slim selection of Edith Wharton short stories. And the next time I was on a subway, I was commuting, I was like flipping through it and reading through it. And I came to Xingu, and it was the first time that I'd loved something so much that as soon as I stopped, I got to the end, I flipped right back to the beginning and started over. And after like the second or third time of doing that in a row, I realized that I was hearing the dialogue in the voices of some of the actresses that were then around the Metropolitan at the time. And I thought, well, let me see if this could be a play, maybe. I was just going to sit down on my computer and just do like a page or two and see how it worked. And the next time I looked up, it was an hour later, and I had a 90% of a one-act play on my computer. And I think I called the artistic director at the time and said, I seem to have written a play. What do we do now? So it was as simple as that. I just the dialogue and the wit of it just caught me around the throat, and I just really wanted to actually see what I was seeing in my head actually out in the world.
I don't always think of her work as being so readily stateable, but that might just be my own, because of some of the subtleties, obviously, of the longer pieces, the social nuance and the emotional depth and complications. This one works so marvelously beautifully. I don't know if Uta or Laurie or Kim or Suzanne, any of you or someone in the audience might have a feeling about that, or are there others that work so well? This one just really does leap off the page and onto the stage, I think.
I think it certainly felt that way to all of us who were involved in it, that it's fabulous dialogue, and it's delicious to have those words, to be able to speak those words and to breathe those words. And I think all the actors who are currently here, and as well as the other ones, here we go, everybody's that all the actors probably feel similarly, that it's just it's a rare opportunity to speak wonderful language, wonderfully words, wonderfully put together. It's a rare treat. Actors, have at it.
Yeah, I was struck by the humor right away when I first read it. Yeah, like you, Kim, I sort of was really wrapped in it as I was reading it and cracking up to myself. So I thought, well, that's a good sign that it could be playable. So it was a pleasure.
It also felt weirdly modern in a way, just what actually was happening, because we all know those kind of the people who are they're pursuing things because that's what people are supposed to do, rather than it's because what interests them. You know what I mean? Where there's people who like, okay, yes, I'm going to read about this particular subject, or I'm going to hold this particular opinion, because that's what people are supposed to do. That's what I mean, you have that today with the influencers on Instagram today. You know, the people that they glom onto things because they think that's what they're supposed to do, and that's as deep into the subject as they go. And I mean, that kind of attitude was around in Wharton's day. It's around today. I did actually briefly try adapt like a modern update, adapting it a second time in like a modern update. So it was like an Oprah book club in contemporary times, and it just didn't work because the language really seemed to fit best with Wharton's own setting. So, but the attitudes that a lot of these women have, you absolutely still find them today in every walk of life. You probably have found them since time immemorial. So I think that might be one reason why it's a stage, because we all know somebody like Justinia Plinth. We all know somebody like Laura Glyde. We all know somebody like we all have it. We can probably think of a real life example in our own lives of at least one of these other women.
Absolutely. I would like to congratulate you all, ladies. It was fabulous, and thank you, Alex, for the ovals and for the whole setting. It was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex, and thank you, Suzanne, for guiding us on this path. You know, it's one thing to read to yourself, and another thing to read out loud, and you know, not being as familiar with a lot of Wharton's words. I think I would have lost some of the humor in it had it not been for Suzanne's direction. I mean, there were certain things that I found humorous just in and of themselves, but you know, the nuances of it, you really did have to sort of understand where she was coming from. And you know, it makes me want to go to the Mount now, because if I listen to all of you who really know her, now I can reread the story with a completely different perspective. So Suzanne did that for me.
Great, I'm glad, because I don't know Edith Wharton very well at all either.
Well, she wrote two of her novels here. She wrote House of Mirth and Ethan Frome.
Ethan Frome. Oh, well, then I do know. Ethan Frome was de rigueur when I went to high school. So yeah, you're right. That was not a very happy ending.
Yeah.
No, indeed. That's another thing.
Another short story I can recommend is Roman Fever. It is it was something that was assigned to me in a class in college. It is one of the very, very few stories that I've read where the surprise twist in the end came in the very last sentence. And for a while, I would love giving it to friends to read, and I would just watch them because I could always tell when they got to the end, because invariably they would like, oh my God. So it's, great. I'm not going to say a thing. Just read it.
Yeah, Kim, it's such a beautiful adaptation. Edith Wharton is one of my favorite novelists, and it is amazingly contemporary. And the language, you just picked just the right things, which is not an easy thing to do. Some of the screen versions of House of Mirth haven't really worked. I mean, her language is so wonderful, but of course, there's such tragedy within the comedy. I mean, but you really found that balance, and she's delicious. Yeah.
Yeah. I
One,
found,
one of the lovely things about this adaptation, Kim, is that you very quickly, the audience very quickly understands who each of these individuals are. They're quite individual from the very beginning of the play, what they're about. They're quite separate women, and that's hard to do just with dialogue. So great job, thanks.
Thank you, thank you.
we also rarely see it. We don't see stuff like this where it's so many women, it's all women, and they're all so funny and of a certain age. For the most part, there's a couple of younger women, but like for the most part, you know, I'm really like kind of racking my brain to say, when's the last time that I really saw something? I think we see it maybe a little bit more in TV, and we see it a little bit more in British TV or foreign TV. But the last time that I actually got to see or be part of something where it was women of a certain age, women who were smart and witty and fallible, and in life we might see this, but we don't see it all that much on the stage.
Interesting.
I was mostly struck by the the beautiful way that someone who is looked down upon can one up all of the higher noses, as they'd say. You know, I thought that was so successful, and the dawning of that upon these, entitled people it's just priceless. But it's also, it does have resonance. It's not just funny, you know. It's very, very lovely.
I have a question from the audience, a social custom question. And it is assuming about the custom of the hostess serving tea and not the servant. And I think it touches more on these this protection of and war to maintain status, both in the doyens of high society, but also within their households. I don't know now. Lori has just rejoined the meeting, so I'm not sure if she's hearing this question or if anyone has any comment about that. We need not be responsible for answering every question asked with authority, but it is an interesting one, I think, this question of who takes on what responsibility.
Well, I thought the tea brings lots of comedy, you know, and that the power play of the maid and Mrs. Barringer, I think, is it Barringer? Bollinger. You know, that I think that her, you know, trying to wrangle the tea. I don't know what was proper at the time, but I thought, you know, there's so much comedy available to us. And that's, you know, it would be, Kim, I'm sure this is, if you're hungry to see this again live, like when we can all be together and put us, you know, because there's so much available to us to make this hilarious.
Like spirit, it reminded me of the scene with well, I'm thinking of Angela Lansbury and a friend of mine playing it, but made with the tea, and there was so much business. It was so interesting. This play has moments, if it were to be played full out, that's so wonderful and loaded socially. So much commentary.
Well, the thing with the hostess of a tea party being the one to serve the tea instead of the maid, that is something that I had read in one of my many odd reference books. So, and it just kind of seemed to fit with, you know, that was the perfect. It just became a great setup for a bit if you were doing it live. But yes, that's a long answer to the question. Yes, that actually was a particular custom at the time. That this was tea was meant to be like, you know, a little bit more of a relaxed and informal kind of thing. So it was the hostess who actually did the serving rather than the maid.
That's interesting because as Kirsty said, and as we all were discovering, I mean, I think all of us are feeling bad that we don't have more time to play with this and do some more, because every time we ran through it, every time we did something, somebody would have an idea about, oh, what if we did this? What if we did that? And they were all, you know, we were sparking off each other, which is the sparkling words inspired the sparkling behavior also. And it's so rich. It's so rich in, you know, in possibility, action.
Which is perhaps the very best place to wind down. I want to thank certainly Suzanne for taking this challenge on. I had a feeling that you would be the one, and everyone, both friends old and new to Metropolitan Playhouse. What a delight to be in your company and to see this wonderful reading. And Uta and Laurie as well, thank you for bringing a little of Lennox down to New York for us through the virtual thrills. I'm going to put something up that won't be read, I think. I think it's not able to be seen, but the YouTube audience is seeing. And encouragement to go to the website of the Mount, which is www.edithwharton.org, and to do offer your support. Everyone, thank you tremendously for being with us. I'm going to seize back the moment and offer my thanks to our audience. But for now, artist, good night.
Good night, and so many thanks. It was wonderful.
And here we are again. Thanks, everybody. As always, it is my really, truly great pleasure to thank you for your support, for being involved with Metropolitan. I hope you'll come back next week, where Michelle LaRue will offer another tale well told, in this case representing T.A. Buck by Edna Ferber, another short story turned into dramatic event in one of Michelle's delightful readings. You may remember she read The Apple Tree on July 11th with us. And as always, your contributions are keeping us on the air, not perhaps in Clover, but certainly in the virtual theater. We are terribly, terribly grateful for your support. It is always very, very welcome at metropolitanplayhouse.org. A special nod to all of our friends who have been so helpful, so supportive up to this point, and are keeping Metropolitan Playhouse a virtual reality.